Thanks for joining us for That Larimer County Show. I'm Denny LaRue, Larimer County Community Information Manager, and this show is on the Larimer County 2014 budget. My co-host is Neil Gluckman, Assistant County Manager. Hi, Neil.
Hey, Denny. How's it going?
It's going well.
So we have an excellent show, as usual.
As usual.
Yep, and we have two fine guests. We have Linda Hoffman, who is the County Manager, and we have Bob Keister, who is the Budget Director, both for Larimer County. And welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Neil.
So,
Good to be here.
We've just you've gone through a budget process. We have like I said, the Budget Manager, the County Manager. You both put the budget together. Long process. I don't know. Starts in probably the spring and then ends when the budget is adopted by the county commissioners. Any surprises as far as the adoption of the county budget?
I don't think so. The surprises came up in mid-year with the flood, and we have quite a few revisions to the 2013 budget, which may carry into our 2014 budget. But no, this is pretty good operating budget, continuing, taking care of our obligations in recovering from the flood, finishing our obligations from recovering from the High Park fire, and trying to continue operating at the levels we've been.
Okay. So the adopted operating budget for Larimer County is about $229 million for 2014, and the total budget is $317.7 million. Can you explain the difference between the operating budget and the total budget?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The easiest way to explain it is there's an awful lot of money that goes through the county budget that does not directly contribute to our operations. Some examples of things like that are money will come into one department so it can be tracked by good accounting practices and be transparent to the community, but then that money goes out into a different department. And so some of that money actually gets double counted. So we take that money out to reveal what is the true operating budget of the county. We sometimes will have one-time expenses, and we try not to skew the budget of what it really takes as cost of government by counting those one-time costs as well.
Okay, great. And for our viewers out there, when we talk about Larimer County's operating budget, what does that mean? What does that pay for?
So much of the services that the county government provides are provided across the county. There's about 300,000 residents in Larimer County. 3 out of 4 of those live in incorporated areas, but they all receive county services. So things like voting and recording materials, criminal justice services like prosecution and pretrial services, all kinds of human services like child protection, aid to needy families, food stamp programs. All of those things are paid for out of the county's budget and offered throughout the county to city and unincorporated residents alike.
Okay.
Let's talk a little bit about revenue. Where does the county get its money? And is this year's money, in terms of revenue, the same as last year, or is it more than?
Well, it's almost the same. We get our revenue from a variety of sources. About 30% comes from our local property taxes. When you or I pay property taxes on our home, about 25% of that, it goes to the county. On an average home, it's around $480.
For all those services.
For all the
that
services just mentioned. Yeah. And then the rest of your property taxes go off to hospital districts, school districts, which are the largest portion, maybe fire districts and water district, other kinds of government services. But that's only 30% of our budget. We're also a major recipient of state and federal funds because we're the sponsor of many state and federal programs that they want provided equally across the whole state. So when you want a service that's done the same way across the state, maybe motor vehicle registration, you can give that to counties and everyone will do it exactly the same way according to state laws. So another 30% of our budget comes from federal and state sources doing programs for the needy, air and water quality monitoring, all sorts of other kinds of important things.
Majority of Health and Human Services.
Health and Human Services, you're right. And then about a third comes from our user fees. Many departments have user fees that establish a fee maybe by the county commissioners, but mostly by statute. There are fees for quite a few different services, like recording documents. When a property sells, our county clerk's office records the deed and the transaction documents, and that's part of our responsibility.
So back to the revenue question, if I had that average house, did I pay more or less this past?
You're going to pay about the same.
The same.
About the same. I think the average home will pay about $1 more per year. So it's a very tiny amount additional. But our total revenue picture is about 1.5% to 2% more from all the sources. Much of that are estimates, because the state fiscal year is a different fiscal year than our county calendar year, and also the federal. So part of it we know, and part of it we estimate, which leads to revisions later on. After we adopt our budget, you'll see that we make revisions to correct for those estimates that are coming in a little higher or lower.
So did the flood of 2013 create a large revision in the 2013 budget?
Absolutely. And some of the money that you see in the 2013 budget is still fire recovery money too. And so when we put together the recommended budget in October, we didn't have as good a numbers as we do now about the cost of flood recovery or even flood response at that time. So some of the adjustments that were made at the end of the year between what was proposed in October and what the commissioners actually adopted had to do with increasing the amount of money set aside for flood recovery.
Okay.
Great example of that is when the flood occurred, we quickly tried to estimate what our obligations would be. And at that time, it was around, not counting the federal and the state dollars that we would get, the county share of the expected cost would be around $12 million. By the time we dotted all our I's and crossed the T's, it was closer to $16 million. And we still aren't finished, because there are still decisions to be made, projects to be carried out, and we can only estimate the appropriate expected expenditure for those things, like fixing roads or repairing bridges.
And in some cases, a lot of our flood recovery costs will be determined, at least in part, by what kinds of grants and matching money from federal and state level we will receive. And those layers of government, just like us, are still trying to sort some of that out, and it's not clear exactly what we'll be eligible for, when we'll be able to apply for those funds, and what they can be used for. So it's a bit of a moving target, but we think that the money that's set aside, the $16 million, is, we hope, pretty close.
Between the flood and the fire, we needed to scrape together about $21 million unexpectedly. Wow. So this has been a large cost to absorb into the budget. But luckily we have some of the reserves to do that, and we've been very careful about our expenditures over the past years, and probably will have to be in the next few years too.
You can almost use a budget that some families do for themselves, of having this emergency money
Right.
put aside to, for some unforeseen circumstance. And it sounds like the county has done a really good job of setting aside this a sum of money for an emergency.
I'm glad you brought that up, Neil, because this year's budget, unlike the ones in about the previous 5 years, is flat from last year. In the previous 5 years, we had been ratcheting down the budget each year because of the sales tax that will expire at the end of 2014. The commissioners were wanting to save money so that that didn't come as a big jolt. So we'd been cutting the budget, cutting the budget, cutting the budget, and this year we're holding more or less flat with the budget we were in last year, because the economy is showing signs of recovery. So we're hopeful that we will be able to stay on kind of this flat trajectory for the next few years, and then as the economy begins to recover, property tax may increase, and then we'll come out even up in a few years.
So last year we talked a lot, we called that the 3-year glide path.
We did.
And I think some of our viewers out there will remember that, the county's 3-year glide path to get to that point, so when the jail funding operating funds drop off, we're okay. So do we still expect, now that we're a little flat, right now we're not going down as much, do we still expect to meet that point when the operating funds drop off?
We know that when the jail sales tax expires at the end of 2014, we will see a real drop in revenue in 2015. And we don't think that we will be operating, matching our expenditures and our revenues and expenses that year. We think that we will be spending a little more than we're bringing in. And so that's why the current budget that's proposed in 14 is still projecting that we will be adding money to reserves that can then be carried over and used in 15, such that we don't operate in the red more than a year or possibly two. Because 2016 is a presidential election, and presidential elections are expensive.
Yeah.
So we know that our budget will be higher that year, and our revenues will still not fully recover. So it's a bit of a balancing act.
It's also a little bit of a chance because we're doing the right thing. We're saving money for this. All we need is one more disaster, and
Pestilence.
yeah, and all bets are off.
I wouldn't use the word need. We don't need that.
No.
One of the things that as county manager, you have to present a balanced budget, and with doing that, you usually have maybe a couple of special proposals. Have you done that for 2014, and anything that above and beyond that the county will be doing in 2014?
The commissioners, when they adopted the budget, they put a little bit of money in so that we can get some customer service training and some project management training for our staff. They added additional money for the flood.
And some for economic development.
Yes. The other thing that is funded this year is we have had a position in our Veterans Services Office that was funded as a temporary position coming out of a position funded through a grant at the Workforce Center. And that had a couple of problems. Number one, the grant's no longer available, but it also made that a rotating appointment. And so the commissioners have elected, in order to keep our staff constant in the Veterans Affairs Office, to fund that position out of the general fund. We think that Veterans Services is only going to get more and more busy in the coming years, and so we didn't think that it was possible to just lose that position. It had to be funded.
Right. Bob, you've been doing this for about 35 years.
Yes.
Any changes in terms of how you prepare a budget going back, and what was that be, 1800s when you first started?
No.
Until now? Tell us about...
Well, there are quite a few changes, but the basic framework for building any budget is first to understand all the things around you that influence your need and requirement to provide services. So in the budget process that we employ, the early part is to do our strategic planning. Where we want to be, what do we need to do, that kind of thing. We also do the financial analysis of what sort of revenues do we think we would have, what might be the needed expenditures.
Was the county doing strategic planning in 1970s?
No, well, we've done
that's
several since the 70s, actually. In the late 70s, we did the strategic plan that said we needed buildings, and we now have buildings. It said we needed to have a new fairgrounds. We have that. So these plans are kind of long-term, and they spell out your goal. Now, they don't necessarily tell you how you're going to get there or how, exact timing of it, but they spell out some of the big things that we want to accomplish. And we're in the midst of a strategic plan right now for the next 5 years, and it looks to providing some services and emphasizing certain areas that are going to be very important to the citizens. So that's a broader paintbrush guide to the budget. Of course, there's the ordinary costs of what will people cost, and what are the benefits going to cost, and how are the price of gasoline and other commodities that we buy, how are they changing. But really, our provision of services and our strategic plan are really going to guide us for the next few years.
One of the things that I want to mention is all of the departments and other elected offices are routinely turning back money at the end of their fiscal year. And they do that because they responsibly manage their money, They are good at budgeting for things. And so it is typical for the commissioners to have the opportunity at the beginning of the year to decide what to do with that money. And we're hopeful that if that pattern holds true, in the beginning of 2014, we'll be able to look at what we call turnback money from 2013 and put it toward that strategic plan that Bob was just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we do not have a spend it or lose it philosophy. And we also, with these turnback dollars, they go back to the fold to see what's best for the community. And we use our strategic plan to guide those dollars. So we'll be doing some pretty important things if we have those dollars, and do them quicker if we have some turnback.
Because departmental budgets are not based on what you spent exactly, so they're not trying to spend everything.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you look at those kinds of things, people hear about federal budgets and state budgets and city budgets and town budgets and our county budget. How do there are 64 counties in Colorado, and we're part of the Big Ten. So those are the mostly Front Range counties with the most populated areas. How do we compare to other budgets in other counties?
Well, we participate in a survey, an annual survey of the 10 largest counties. And we're pretty much in the middle. Mm-hmm. In terms of the rate of taxation that we have, our property tax rate, it's about in the middle. We tend to be in the middle in terms of pay ranges, but that's typical because many of them are larger metropolitan areas. Mm-hmm. We provide, most counties have to provide about the same services. Our key role in providing services to the community is in public safety, health, and Neil mentioned health and human services, environmental programs. Sometimes counties get involved in open space and that kind of thing, which many do. Mm-hmm. And also we do the elections and motor vehicle registration and prosecuting criminals and running the jail. So all counties do those things. We're probably very different in two areas. We were kind of a vanguard in the vote centers to try to condense them down and keep the cost of voting lower. And so that's where we're a little bit different. And also we do an awful lot of alternative sentencing. We try to only put the really bad people in jail, and if someone else, if they can be trusted to do other things, operate out of a alternative sentencing program or be on work ender, we try to get them out so that it lowers the cost to the citizens. And we're pretty different in that way.
One of the things that's different about Larimer County's budget process compared to other counties, and this was implemented before my time, but most of the cost of county government is personnel. Mm-hmm. I mean, you need people to provide all these services. And so a little bit of a wiggle on a pay raise or cost of living raise will really influence the budget. And a lot of other counties wait until fairly late in the budget season to make the decision of what the commissioners are going to be think is an appropriate level of raise. And we do that fairly early. I think Bob's phone rings off the hook in late summer as other counties say, what'd you do, because we're one of the first ones to set those targets. And that really helps our departments put together more accurate budgets. And I think that that's why we get such good results from our budgets, is because the managers really have a way of making accurate projections of the money they need and the programs they can provide.
And those salaries are for the county that has a specific process or a model which they follow in terms of we're in the 50th percentile, and
Right.
it's a very exacting way of doing that.
Yeah, that really helps us. Having a goal,
Right.
a pay philosophy.
And that's specific to Larimer
Right,
County.
it's specific to Larimer County. Then we can go out and survey and see where we stand and which types of positions need an adjustment and which ones don't. We have variable adjustments many times where some jobs where the market is going up, they get a larger market adjustment than others where the jobs are not. So we try to stay right at that 50 percentile that when we go out and survey, as many are paid more as there are paid less than what we do for our job.
You know, I'm a little bit confused because looks like the county budget is about $300 million.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a lot of money to serve the unincorporated population.
It is.
It would be.
It
would be.
if that was the case,
But our budget serves all of the citizens of Larimer County. And so most of that money is spent blind to municipal boundaries. So as a city resident, I live in an unincorporated city, and as a city resident, I receive most of the same services as a county resident. The only thing that we really do that would be considered duplicative of what cities do is building permits, for example. Our building inspectors collect their fees, they use that money to do their building inspections, and that's very similar to what you would see in a municipality. But most of our services are blind to municipal boundaries. So I wish that we had that much money for a quarter of our population,
that would
but we have to stretch it pretty thin
we
to
don't
reach
have
everyone.
free Wi-Fi, right? Everywhere?
So what I hear you saying is that a majority of our services are countywide, unincorporated for the municipalities everywhere.
Absolutely. And it's a vast majority. We've had conversations about how we should count those, but any way you slice and dice it, it's at least 90%.
Wow.
I had a question too. I wanted to make sure to get in before we left the conversation on the budget about comparative to other counties, but kind of unique to Larimer counties. The two things are, as Neil pointed out earlier, Larimer County's been good at building up reserves for an emergency. Is that typical of counties? And the other thing is the wellness program. I know that Larimer County we've seen as employees no increase in our medical for 4 years now.
4 years straight.
It's amazing. That's amazing. So how is that done? And in the reserves question too.
Well, I can answer the reserves question. We're very fiscally conservative. Again, we have policies that try to encourage departments to be efficient, to share, to collaborate. We don't push spend your budget or lose it. We don't pull back that way. And we try to manage our reserves from the standpoint of if we develop any dollars that can be added to reserve, we try to earmark where they might go in a general sense. So we've already identified some needs for our reserves, like some for our strategic plan implementation. We have some communication towers that we're going to have to do in the mountains possibly for our emergency public safety radio system. We'll earmark some dollars for those. We know we're going to have some buildings that need repairs down the road, and we designate reserves for those. We know that the landfill is going to only last maybe another 14 to 15 years, and then we have to close it down, monitor it environmentally forever, and go move to another location, and we're building reserves for those. So we're very careful about being the kind of organization that sets aside money in advance so we aren't surprised.
It's a culture.
And it's a cultural thing, really.
Yeah.
Regarding the wellness program, a lot of agencies and organizations have wellness programs now. Larimer County has very high participation in our wellness program, and it's one of those deals where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So since we are self-insured, that wellness program has really emphasized getting people to be aware of health risks, getting them to monitor those, address those, changing behavior. You wouldn't know it sometimes, how aggressive.
Bob and I? Oh.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't see me on the treadmill as often as I ought to be, but as a whole, Larimer County staff are getting healthier, and a lot of that is having an influence in a positive way on our health care costs.
Mm-hmm. And that really is something to brag about. 4 years.
Oh my gosh.
You're
yes.
listening to the media about all both public and private sector, that how much their health costs has gone up. So Larimer County is very fortunate.
And having our own health clinic too
Yes.
helps a lot with costs. Somebody can go there for a blood test and they don't have time away from work for sick leave, and they don't have, it all contributes
That's a big part too, right?
to making that work. That's pretty exciting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we have just a few more minutes left. Are there things that we want to get out about the budget specifically? Like, where are we going from here? When does this start? This was a 2-month process of when you recommended in October a balanced budget to when it finally was adopted in December. commissioners listening to citizens and seeing the changes, as you said, the many factors that influence the budget. So what happens now? When do you start?
Well,
this
there are
process?
some ministerial practices we have to do. We have to file a copy of our budget with the state. We'll also update our website with our final adopted budget, load the budget into our accounting system so that departments can begin managing the next year's budget and knowing where they stand, actual versus budget. Then we'll go into the planning process again and look at what do we need to do, what are the factors that are affecting our budget, and we'll probably do that through May, June, and then we'll issue guidance to all the departments. We'll work with the commissioners on policy guidance and essentially begin the process all over again.
In 2014 for the 2015 budget,
That's
which
correct.
will be what, your 36th?
Yeah.
But Bob, if someone goes to larimer.org, do they just do /budget?
That's correct. And you can see the last 10 years of budgets and our budget practices and summaries of our budgets and other kinds of information.
Are you hoping that we talked a little earlier about the strategic plan. Are you hoping in the long term that some of the programs that come out of the strategic planning process can address some of these kind of ongoing needs we've had?
Absolutely. The strategic plan has 4 real goals for the community: flood and fire preparedness, the safety and well-being, transportation and economic development. There's a collaboration goal, and there are 2 internal goals that have to do with streamlined operations and very strong customer service. Under that streamlined operations, there is a goal, or there is an objective that looks at making some minor changes to the budgeting program, and Bob will be leading that objective, and we'll see changes and improvements ahead as we work through making that process even better.
And those work plans really get underway in the coming year.
Yeah, the work plans are being developed now.
So, okay. All right. Anything you want to add, Neil?
No, I think I've learned a lot.
Have you? Good.
Especially, I thought it was just the unincorporated area. You know,
Are these services for everybody?
it sounds like it's for 90%.
19.
Well, 90%, at least 90% of our services are provided to all
of the-
residents.
All the residents of
And
all
it
of
just so
Lebanon.
happens that 3/4 of those live within an incorporated boundary, but we're blind to that.
Restaurants are everywhere.
Yes.
And restaurant inspections, whether they're outside of city limits, inside of city limits, we want to make sure they're safe, and that's a service we provide.
1,800 inspections in last year.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of inspections. Follow up and keep most of them in excellent, health status.
Right, and that's really important to the citizens. I mean,
Oh,
the bottom
yeah.
line is the public safety,
Yeah.
not just the public safety that the sheriff provides, but the
Right.
safety of our...
Well, child protection services, adult protective services, services for seniors, all of those programs are county
County
services
services.
provided countywide.
Thank you so much for being here for the budget show for 2014.
Thank you.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Neil.
Thank you.
Okay. Got some good topics coming up in 2014?
I'm thinking of it right now.
Okay.
We'll release it soon.
Okay. Hey, thank you for joining us for That Larimer County Show.